outstanding coverage, as always, from Michael Williams, our anchor here at News Channel 5. He's just returned from Cuba, covering the Pope's historic visit there, of course. I can't wait. I just want to sit and talk with a cup of coffee for hours on end, but I can't wait to hear everything. But for our audience and people who know you so well here, first let's talk about this. You've been to Cuba so many times as a network reporter.
Well, for
prior.
the NBC stations group, yeah.
Right.
And for my old stations, this was my 5th trip to Cuba,
Yes.
my 2nd papal trip. Pope John Paul, now St. John Paul, in 1998. Let me say at the outset, so honored to be part of a great team.
Right.
Michelle Casado on air, Shannon, you know, Ian Doherty, photographer, Tom Anderson, engineer. Shannon and I know none of this happens without the behind-the-scenes talents. But it was an interesting experience, the arc of seeing how things were in 1998 now. More religious freedom. There's more space for the church now. Keep in mind, as you look at footage of the pontiff when he was in Cuba, that in 1998 they were only 6 years removed from Cuba being an officially atheist state. So there's more room for the church now. This, the Plaza de la Revolucion, where I was Sunday as the pontiff spoke and addressed a huge audience, tens of thousands of people. But still, priests are not going to speak out from the pulpit forcefully against the Cuban regime. People there still very tough economically for people to make their way, and yet more hope about the U.S.-Cuba relation. Sure. It'll mean more to people. And I would have people tell me privately, because nobody wants to talk loud publicly. You don't hear criticism of government there.
Sure.
It's maybe 220 miles distant, not very far away, but it's a long ways away when it comes to the kind of freedoms you and I take for granted to criticize government. Nonetheless, people would tell me quietly, we hope the new U.S.-Cuba relations, one that pull more money in our pockets, be good for us. So there's a little more sense of hope there, and people trying to find their space as we look again at the plaza from the other day. So it was interesting to see that change. A long way to go, but some hope.
I was curious, your feeling landing this, I guess this 5th time, having been there 4 times previously, to feel that energy after the thawed relations between the two countries. So that was pre-Pope. Post-Pope, how were they changed, Michael, this country?
Well, certainly the Cuban people, like the people in our country right now, he's a man of acknowledged huge moral authority. You saw it in Congress today. Whether it's the United States Congress or the Cuban people, he has a moral authority that draws people to him worldwide. Whether you agree with him on every issue or not, certainly on clerical sex abuse, many in this country said he did not go far enough to criticize the failings of the church in handling that. So there are certainly a lot of issues there. Certainly people in Congress today, some sat on their hands figuratively about talks for abolition of the death penalty and so on and so forth and other topics. But he's a man that everyone agrees universally, and the Cuban people certainly felt that, a man of great moral authority. I think there were people on the island privately, and certainly people in our Cuban-American community, who wished he had spoken out even more directly and more forcefully about an end to the one-state communist dictatorship that has ruled that island for 56 years now. But people trying to find that space and hoping his moral authority. Let me say, he did talk about we should not be wedded to an ideology. He said that at the papal mass on Sunday. And that was a hint, a nudge, that listen, one party rule is not what we want. We want people to have a sense that it's about humanism, about people, and not an ideology. So he's trying to create some space there. He leaves behind excitement and hope. He was a centerpiece of the U.S.-Cuba opening. We're going to have to see how that plays out, though, Shannon. It
was interesting to see how he handled his meeting, say, with Fidel Castro versus his meeting with Barack Obama, and how very vocal he was on, political interest points and talking points in the United States, while he seemed to couch that a bit while in Cuba. I mean, he had a message, but it wasn't as vocal in terms of policy, correct?
Certainly people, it was, from what we understood, a much more muted talk with the 89-year-old former dictator and leader of Cuba, Fidel Castro, than his brother Raul. I know there were photos there. I'm actually seeing some of the photos for the first time. I was running around so much.
Busy.
It was fun for me to get to actually see some of the coverage today. But certainly a sense there, again, some wished he'd taken a harder line with the Castro regime, no doubt. Clearly, many people on the island are still suffering, dissidents who are in jail, people who do not feel they can speak out freely, something you and I take for granted. Is that going to change? Will the U.S.-Cuba opening really allow an opening not just of people? I said in one of my stories, the biggest, most involved things that may open up there will be and the things that I think scare the Castro regime the most are the opening of ideas, of the internet, so on and so forth, because how do you control that? It's going to be an interesting dynamic. I'd love to be a correspondent there for the next 5 or 10 years.
Well, you did such a magnificent job.
If you're listening, Scripps.
There will be plenty to report on, certainly. I appreciate it. Michael, you were magnificent as always. We appreciate you. See you at 5.
Thanks.